everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Bree, and this is the Damn Strong Podcast. Today, we're talking about weight loss plateaus. Honestly, I'm going to come out here swinging, just saying that pretty much everyone's going to experience a weight loss plateau at some point in their journey. And I'll kind of talk about two different camps that you could be in. Either you reach this weight loss plateau because of like physiological reasons, or you reach it because of psychological reasons. And I feel like social media really digs into the physiological, and there's a few myths kind of around the physiological that I want to kind of bust through. But people don't consider the psychological reasons that you might hit this weight loss plateau. So I want to dive into both of these camps. The first camp I actually want to dive into is the psychological camp, because again, I feel like we so take apart and just like it's this physiological thing and there's nothing you can do and control about it. And it's like, there's some truth there, but we need to break down. And I want you to understand, at the end of the day, when it comes to a weight loss plateau, it's not about necessarily avoiding it, because again, as I go through these two different camps of reasons, you can't really avoid it. It's more so understanding it and then understanding what are my options from here? We'll talk about that. So let me not get ahead of myself. Let me first talk about what is a weight loss plateau. It's exactly what it sounds like. When you think of a plateau, it means you come to this equilibrium. Like there's just no progression, right? A plateau is a flat piece of land, right? And so if you're not on a hill or going uphill or downhill, you're just kind of coasting. So a lot of people in their weight loss journey will see, maybe not great's the right word, but like we'll see weight loss, see things happening, see things progressing. And all of a sudden they hit this point where like, they're not seeing progress like they previously were. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm stuck. What do I do? And that's probably one of the most common DMs I get is people are like, okay, I understand you got to be in a calorie deficit. I understand I need to have a step goal or hit protein or track calories, whatever it may be. But they hit this point of stagnation and there's a little bit of freak out. So let's talk about the two camps. The first one being psychological, of sometimes when you hit a weight loss plateau, it's not because your calories aren't set up right or your steps aren't set up right, or you need to change any of those things. A lot of times when you hit this plateau, it's because you've been in a deficit for a certain amount of time. And after a certain amount of time being in a deficit, a lot of people experience diet fatigue, meaning you just get to this point where like you get a little sloppy in your tracking, or maybe you track this, but you don't track this, or like you don't really hit your step goals super often, and you're not really going for your workouts anymore. And so the screws get loosened a little bit. So previously when you were dropping, half a pound per week, everything was tightened up. You were hitting your protocols 100%, things were moving and grooving. And as you're getting a little bit of a diet fatigue, things loosen up here and there. Maybe you don't track one day on the weekend, or you don't track when you go to, some certain event. And so you don't have quite an accurate view of what your calories are. Things may tend to slow down. And so that's the psychological part that I don't think a lot of people talk about, is typically when you see a plateau, that could be a good sign that you are hitting a diet fatigue point, and maybe it's time to take a break. And so obviously you kind of check yourself and be like, okay, am I being 100% accurate on stuff? And then we'll go through those protocols of like things to think about when you're at a plateau and you're like, okay, I want to move forward, what I need to analyze. But the first camp is psychological. Okay. A lot of people after certain times start to get sloppy in their protocols and things slow down because you're hitting protocols at 70% versus 100% that you previously were. Second reason that other camp that you could be at a weight loss plateau is as you start to lose body fat, your body physically gets smaller. And there will be a point where, your maintenance is going to go down, and the deficit where you were previously, let's say you're losing half a pound to a pound per week. As you lose weight, that deficit gets smaller and smaller because your maintenance gets smaller and smaller. Let me kind of dive into that a little bit. So currently right now, I'm averaging about 137 pounds. Let's just say, I'm just throwing out a random number. Let's say I maintain 137 pounds with, hitting 10K steps per day, and I eat 2,300 calories, and I maintain that. If I lost a pound of body fat, technically my maintenance would drop as well, because my body is physically smaller. And so my body doesn't need as much energy to maintain 136 pounds as it does 137. How much it drops, I'm not going to dive into like how much energy a pound of fat expends versus muscle and all that kind of stuff. But let's say, previously I'm maintaining at 2,300 calories. Maybe now my maintenance is 2,298 calories. It dropped by 2 calories because I lost a pound of fat, right? So when you lose 10, 20, 30 plus pounds, your maintenance is going to drop down. So let's say you're losing body fat at 2,000 calories, right? I'm just going to do nice round numbers, 2,000 calories, and you maintain at 2,500. Let's say you drop 50 pounds, right? Your maintenance may no longer be 2,500. It may now be 2,100. And so you're only in a deficit of about 100 calorie difference from 2,100 being your maintenance and 2,000 being your deficit. So over time, your maintenance calories will get lower. Therefore, you have to be in a deeper deficit. So again, let's just say you were previously maintaining at 2,500 calories. You lost 50 pounds. Now you maintain at 2,100 calories. And so your deficit of 2,000 isn't as large of a deficit as it was before. So what can happen is that you've lost enough weight that now your weight loss is plateauing because you're not in as deep of a deficit as you were before. And so because your body is physically smaller, you have two options. You either can lower your calories or increase your activity, right? So, if this was someone in this situation, let's say they lost 50 pounds and they still had 10 pounds they wanted to lose, they would probably, lower their deficit calories from 2,000 maybe to 1,800 or 1,700, and they would need to move that mark. So those are the two camps. One being the psychological one if things just start to get a little bit sloppy, and it's not that you can't lose body fat on the calories that you've set up for yourself. It's that you're actually not eating at those calories and you're not getting the amount of activity that you need into. And so things have loosened up a bit. And so you've stalled out your progress a little bit, or you land in the other camp of that you've lost enough weight that it changed your deficit calories, right? Your deficit calories need to be a little bit lower. And so you now have the option of changing things as well. Now, I know a lot of you guys are thinking like, okay, if I fall into the camp of as I lose more weight, my deficit calories are going to get lower. Like, when does that happen? When do I need to make that adjustment? There isn't a hard and fast number or rule to tell you that. I tell my clients generally, and please take this with this is not standard. You could totally hit this benchmark and not need to change anything. But typically around a 10% reduction of weight, you might need to adjust things. You could. There's been clients where I've seen a 10% reduction and we're still seeing great progress and we don't change anything. And that's why having data to back things up is so, so important for you to be able to be like, okay, instead of just when you hit a 10% fat loss reduction or weight reduction, you automatically change your calories or your activity. You can be like, okay, I've hit a 10% reduction in my weight loss, but everything's still moving really, really well, right? So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Let's kind of jump into, okay, if you hit a weight loss plateau, what can you do, right? So let's first talk about the psychological camp. If it's the psychological camp and you're like, hey, you know what, Bree, you're right. I'm hitting this point where I'm having diet fatigue. I'm not tracking accurately. I want more food. I'm ready for that. I've just been in a deficit for a certain amount of time. I'm just ready to be out and take a break, right? Then you could go back to maintenance, give yourself a break. I do have a whole reverse dieting episode, Finding Your Maintenance Calories, episode 43, if you want to listen to that. And then give yourself a break. You might be maybe fatigued a little bit from tracking. So you could find your maintenance calories, start to, not track here and there, let up on tracking, or just totally take time off from tracking. So if you're in that psychological point, that's honestly sometimes the hardest actually camp to be in, because for a lot of you guys, you're not going to reach your fat loss goals the first time round, right? You're going to go into a deficit. You're going to do it for 12, 16, 18 weeks, and you'll achieve a good amount of fat loss, but maybe not the amount or total that you want. And accepting and pausing your fat loss progress can be really hard for people, because people are like, I just want to hit this goal already. But sometimes part of hitting that goal is giving yourself a break, because what happens if you just push into diet fatigue, you end up burning yourself out more, and it actually just takes longer to reach your fat loss goals. When you say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit fatigued, let me take a little bit break and come back into it. I always explain it's just like a rubber band. The only way to get a rubber band to move forward is by pulling back. And that's not to say maintenance is going backwards. It's saying, hey, you're taking a pot, you've shot the rubber band went as far as it could, and you caught up to the rubber band, right? And so now you're picking up the rubber band, you're pulling back, you're going to maintenance, so that way you can shoot forward and go back into another deficit. So I think maintenance is a very, very underrated place to be, because a lot of times if you kept pushing forward and trying to be in deficit, even though you're fatigued and your protocols have loosened up and you're not being as accurate, you're just on this hamster wheel and it ends up burning you out. And then you're burned out and you have to end up taking a break anyways because you're burned out, right? So it's just being a little bit more proactive and progressive about it. So that would be what I would consider if you're experiencing that diet fatigue, is taking a break. if you're someone where you're like, hey, Brie, this is actually the first thing. Let's talk about what you need to go through before you'd even consider changing your calories or activity. If you're in the camp of, hey, I've lost enough weight that my maintenance calories have changed and therefore my deficit calories have changed. The first thing you need to think about is, are all my bolts tightened, right? Am I hitting my protocols really, really well? Because it could be that you're not experiencing diet fatigue. Maybe you just kind of gotten a little loosey-goosey on things. And it's not that you've hit a plateau. You're just like, oh, I decided to stop tracking oil, or I've decided to, I'm not tracking when I go out to eat. It could be you don't need to change anything. You just naturally loosened up on some of your protocols. You just need to tighten those up. So the first thing that you need to think about when you've hit a weight loss plateau, if it's not the diet fatigue, you're in the camp of, hey, maybe it's that I have dropped a lot of weight and therefore things have changed. The first thing I want you to think about is, am I hitting all my protocols 100%? Am I super tight with my tracking? Am I over tracking when I go out to eat, and make sure that I'm tracking properly? Am I weighing things on my scale? Like, just think through that first. And then once you've thought through that and you're like, let's say you're in the camp of, yep, Brie, I'm 100%. If you're not 100%, tighten it up to be 100% first. But if you are 100%, the next thing you can do is consider changing your calories or your activity. And the reason I say consider is because you need to weigh those trade-offs, right? So it may be that you've lost 50 pounds and you're like, okay, like, I have hit a plateau. If I want to continue on, I'm going to have to lower my calories or increase my activity. And again, why I say consider is maybe that's not worth it to you right now, right? There's this trade-off of like, there's a certain amount of juice to the squeeze, right? Let's even talk about someone who hasn't lost 50 pounds. Let's talk about maybe you've lost 10 pounds and you're super, super lean. You're someone that's like, you're muscular, you're lean, and you're wanting to get like show day lean. You want to get bodybuilder lean, right? Is the trade-off, and you've hit a plateau, right? You've lost some weight where, you know what, your calories have shifted. Maybe you were in a deficit at 1,600 calories. And for you to continue to push leaner and leaner, you would have to eat at 1,400 calories. Okay. And you know what? It's your body, it's your life. If you want to push into being even leaner, you can, but you need to consider those trade-offs. Is it worth it to get leaner, right? Like, is it worth it to be at 1,400 calories to get leaner? And then after, let's say you do push that lean, can you maintain that lean? And there's also the part of like, you may not know. And that's something I'm trying to experiment with myself now. I'm probably the leanest that I've ever been with the amount of muscle and the amount of fat I've had. And I'm experimenting now, like, is this amount of leanness maintainable for me? Does it represent my best life? And you know what? I may be able to maintain it. It may be that my lifestyle and how I go out to eat and how I socialize with friends, I naturally just eat a little bit higher calories. So I'm naturally going to carry a little bit more weight on me, but that represents my best life. So when you come to the conclusion of, okay, I am in the camp of the amount of weight I have lost has altered my maintenance calories, which alters my deficit calories. And therefore, if I want to continue at the same rate that I was losing previously, maybe that's half a pound to a pound per week, I am going to have to decrease my calories or increase my activity. Once you've considered that, then you can decide, okay, do I want to do one or the other, or a little bit of both, right? You could decrease your calories by a little bit, you could increase your steps by a little bit, or you could do a little bit of both, right? So it's really about measuring those trade-offs depending where you're at. You might be like, hey, maybe you've lost 50 pounds and you're like, yeah, I still got 30 more pounds that I want to lose. And the trade-off that I have to make is totally worth it. That juice is worth the squeeze. I'm going to keep going forward. But the consideration of if the trade-off is worth it might be more so for my super, maybe the last 5 pound girlies out there, right? There's that consideration of, you may achieve the body that you desire by gaining 5 pounds of muscle versus losing 5 pounds of body fat. I know that's kind of like a mind-blowing thing to think about, but you would actually get leaner if you maintain the exact same body fat levels you have now, but put on 5 pounds of muscle, you would actually get leaner. Because you have to remember, body fat percentage or being lean is just a body fat to muscle ratio. And you can play around with that, right? If you've gotten, lost an amount of body fat and you're like, okay, I'm done losing body fat, you can increase muscle. And therefore that gets you leaner. And so again, there's so many different camps and different journeys and lifestyles and people that all this follows into, right? You may have 100 pounds to lose. You may be trying to lose the last 5 pounds. And so the trade-offs are going to be different for different types of people. It could even be something as simple as like, you've hit a fat loss plateau, but like summer's coming up and you're like, you know what? I don't want to be in a deficit for summer. I'm going on a 2-week trip in, June, July, and August. And I don't want to be in a deficit during those times. Or maybe the holidays are coming up and you're like, you know what? I don't want to be in deficit during the holidays. You totally can be, right? But maybe the trade-offs of the holidays, you're like, you know what? I've hit a little bit of a plateau. That means I have to push into a deficit for longer. Let's see what life looks like right now. You know what? Me pushing a little bit harder right now doesn't make sense with the life circumstances that I have coming up. So now I want to make the transition into talking about how social media portrays, weight loss plateaus. A lot of times when you're on Instagram and you see people talking about weight loss plateaus, typically how uninformed people will talk about it is, you've been in a deficit for so long that your body has learned to adjust your body to this new maintenance calories. And so now long the deficit calories that you were at no longer work for you because your body's smart and, realized, hey, you're in a deficit 1,600 calories. So what it did is it, did some metabolic adaptation and it's adjusted your calories. That way you can no longer lose calories on 1,600. You have to be at 1,000 calories to lose weight. There's a little bit of truth to that, but they're so overshooting that, right? So yes, metabolic adaptation is a real thing. And I have an episode on it. That is going to be episode 31. If you want to deep dive into metabolic adaptation, what it is, what it isn't, I'll do a little covering of it here. But metabolic adaptation is mainly what I just previously talked about, right? Over time, as you have a smaller body and get a smaller body, it takes less energy for your body to maintain a smaller body, right? The reason why Sage, my husband, his calories are so much higher than mine for maintenance is because he weighs so much more than me and has so much more muscle than me. So his body is more metabolically demanding than mine. That's really, yes, gender does play a little bit into it. There is some genetics that play into it, but the mass majority of the reason that his calories are higher is he's physically bigger than me. He does have more muscle, which muscle is more metabolically demanding. And he's also just naturally more active than me. I'm the person that's always asking him to hand me the remote. Okay. I could sit forever. He's a busybody. He gets up, he walks around, he moves around. And so that's the biggest reason that our maintenance calories are different, right? So yes, there is some truth that over time, as you're in a deficit, your body will get smaller and smaller, and therefore your maintenance calories change. But people make it sound like that you being in a deficit for 12 weeks, if you're in a deficit for longer than 12 weeks, your metabolism adapts so much, like you could lose 5 pounds, right, over 12 weeks. But because you've been in a deficit in this fat loss phase for 12 weeks, your body's like, I don't want to be in a deficit anymore. And it learns to like adapt to this extreme degree and says, hey, 1,600 calories are now your maintenance. That's just not true. That's not how it works. If your deficit calories, if you were deficiting on 1,600 calories and then now maintaining on 1,600 calories, you would have to get small enough that 1,600 calories is your maintenance. You'd have to be very small for that to be the case, right? Now, the other part of metabolic adaptation as well is, when you're in a deficit, your body doesn't want to lose body fat. Your body is always trying to reach homeostasis or equilibrium, right? So when you go into a deficit, you're throwing it out of equilibrium. And so your body does a little bit kind of fight back against that. It's like, okay, we don't want to be losing body fat. Like we don't want to go, we're tapping into our savings right now. Like this is not okay. Let's do things so that way she doesn't tap into savings more or lose more body fat. So things like talking with your hands or tapping your feet or getting up to go to the bathroom, your body will not shut down, but you'll do those things less. I'm very talkative with my hands. When I'm in a deficit, I don't talk with my hands as much, just without thinking about it, because my body's trying to preserve energy. So that way it's hoping to push me hoping that I'm not in a deficit because it doesn't want to be out of equilibrium, right? So a lot of times, I'll just say a lot of times on social media, people talk about this weight loss plateau because you've been putting your body in a calorie deficit for 12 weeks. And because you've been in the calorie deficit for 12 weeks, your body magically just decides, 1,600 calories is now our new maintenance. Again, that's not how it works. That is absolutely incorrect. Yes, there is such a thing as metabolic adaptation, but you would have to be at those calories for such a long amount of time and lose such a substantial amount of weight that your deficit calories then become your maintenance calories. And that's just not how it works. It's not that 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 18 weeks has your body just shut down and decide, now I'm going to maintain on 1,600 calories. Coaches will talk about like a weight loss plateau as, maybe you've been a chronic dieter or you've been trying to lose weight forever. You can remember the last time you weren't trying to lose weight because you've been trying to be in a deficit, for so many years. You've broken your metabolism and you need to reverse diet to fix your metabolism. And that's where you're hitting this weight loss plateau again, which is just so incorrect on how it is. Like, if you think about like a chronic dieter is kind of an oxymoron. If you were really in a calorie deficit, you would be losing weight and then hit that goal. If you have been chronically dieting or chronically in a calorie deficit and you're not losing body fat, then you're not actually in a calorie deficit. And so there's a difference between psychologically maybe being a chronic dieter and then people who are, actually chronically dieting and they're getting to such an unhealthy amount of body fat levels, like low body fat, that they're losing their period, they're losing their hair, right? You can do all the things to be in deficit. You could be tracking and trying to get your steps in, but then you say screw it on the weekends, and then you have binges or you overeat, and you're in this deficit mindset, but you're on a hamster wheel and you're not moving anywhere. So you actually aren't in a deficit. And so this thing of like a chronic dieter is, again, kind of an oxymoron where psychologically, yes, you feel like you can't remember the last time you weren't trying to achieve fat loss. And so you feel like this chronic dieter, but you haven't hit the fat loss goals that you want because you haven't been actually in a deficit. And so that's how I typically see it on Instagram, that people present weight loss plateaus. It's not you. It's not your fault. It's because you've been in a deficit for so long that your body's so stressed out that all of its processes are shutting down, and it's nothing that you can control. You need to give your body more food and sit at maintenance, and then you'll reset your metabolism and then you'll lose body fat. When really typically what's happening, again, in either camps, the first camp being you're not actually being 100% adherent to your protocols, or you're in the other camp where you've lost a ton of weight, or you're so lean that you're now needing to make shifts and adjust your calories or your activity. So if you can really understand and that's my goal of this episode, if you can understand what a weight loss plateau is and what's happening and why it occurs, then you can understand if things need to be changed or you just simply need to tighten things up. But again, I do think it'd be really helpful after listening to this episode, going over to episode 31, metabolic adaptation, that I did with Alex, and diving into that one. I think it'll help you to, one, understand metabolic adaptation more, which will pair really, really well with this episode, and then understanding weight loss plateau. All right, guys, that is the end of this episode. As always, a free way to support the show is to screenshot this, share this on your stories. Make sure to tag me in it. If you have any feedback or just any thoughts, or if this was really, really helpful of an episode, please don't forget to shoot me a DM. I always, always, always appreciate your guys' feedback. It really, I know I say this like every episode, but it actually really, truly helps me to continue to create episodes because you guys give me little ideas and little sparks on the feedback you get me on future episodes to create. So I hope to see you guys on the next episode, and have a great week.